y'all, this is the first instruction video for Project 3, Conceptual Self-Portraits. Now, there are a lot of different ways to make a bust or a figure sculpture. And the way we're going to learn today is a pretty straightforward method that's just going to work well for our circumstances, needing to transport this and whatnot, and that is with a base made of coils. So we'll get into how to do that in a second, but I just want you to know it's not the only way. The way that Aisha, our visiting artist, does it is usually by building solid, and different ways work better for different people and also work better for different styles. But for COVID times, for transporting it, and for our time constraint, we'll be doing a coil base. So I'm going to show you how to make that. So for this, we're going to just need a couple things. We're going to need a board. So you've got your 12 by 12 board that I gave you. Using this on the diagonal like this, having this be the base of your board will give you a good amount of width. Obviously this is not going to be life size, but that will be a good starting point, and that will be easy to transport because you've got the board. You're going to need clay, and we're going to be coil building. So you're going to need just those things to start out, but of course you're going to need your tools. Later on you're going to need your decorative slips, and look at your sketches. So in my sketch I know that I have my main bust form, and then I've got the little pieces that I'm going to be adding, and so like a tomato, I might just go ahead and pinch those out and let them be getting ready while I'm working on my base bust form. So just use your time wisely, think ahead about what you're going to need, and then you're going to want to make sure that your bust is set up to the point that it can support weight, and that your pieces that you add on are to the point where they can support themselves so we can attach them. All right, so I'm going to set this aside for right now. Roll up my sleeves. First thing I'm going to do is start with some big coils. Now, different people like different sizes of coils, but because this is going to be a large base for a taller form that we're building, I like to start with a couple of really fat coils on the bottom, and then go up to that sort of thinner coil, although I like to keep it at a 1/2 inch or larger. So unless I'm building something really fine, maybe up on top, I'm going to stick to 1/2 inch or thicker. But for these coils, these are more like 3/4 inch to an inch, these first few bottom coils. So you can see, like against my hand, against my finger, how thick these coils are, 3/4 inch to an inch. So I'm going to bring my board back over, and I'm going to set up my shape. Now, if you figure out that like figure sculpting is your thing, then again, there are a lot of different ways that we can do this. But for right now, we're going to start with, depending on your sketch, obviously start with something that makes sense for your sketch. But for my sketch, I'm using a pretty basic bust form, so I'm just going to start with an oval and just give my sides a little bit of thickness. That's going to give me a nice solid base. I can always trim it up, but I'm going to start with that nice solid base. So let me get another big fat coil. So remember, I'm just squishing the clay first, and I could use a little less if this is hard on my hands. So I'm squishing it into that big rope, and then doing this part. And I'm again using mostly this part of my hands. So I like to stand when I roll my coils, and I like to move around, but everyone's a little different, you gotta see what works for you. All right, so again, I've got these 3/4 inch or maybe 1 inch coils. Bring my piece back, get this in there. Remember to connect those really well. Because these are real fat, I'm going to do I'm gonna go ahead and do 3, so I'm almost there. You can start with 2, just squishing 2 together. I'm gonna start with 3, so let me do this last bit. So I've got my coils together, and I want the bottom coil to be kind of the widest. I'm not really moving in yet, but I'm just gonna look at my coils and just make sure that they're sort of straight up and down, or maybe just a little bit in. You know, we always like things to go in that direction in clay. I never really noticed that till I started making videos about it. All right, and when I like my shape up here, then I'm gonna go ahead and squish these coils together. Quick reminder, when I'm pushing on the outside, I'm supporting on the inside, and vice versa. When I'm squishing the coils on the inside, I'm supporting on the outside. And also, clay is nothing if not something that makes us humble. So if you see this messiness out here, don't worry about it too much. We can clean it up later with our wooden knife, just give that a little clean edge, but it's not something we need to worry about too much right now. We'll be refining everything later. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and build this back up. I'm building the shoulder, so I'm building up like this. And you can think about, you know, whether is there an arm part, how much of the arm is in your sculpture. But anyway, I'm building up from about here up. Okay, so now that I've got some pretty good height, I'm just gonna tidy these up, and I wanna make sure that I'm getting that nice shape that I like. Once I've got some good height, I can go just a little thinner with my coils, but I'm liking this size. This is 3/4 of an inch. I might go down to like maybe a little bit of a fat 1/2 inch. And that is just because this is going to be the base of everything, so I want it to be really strong and solid. So I'm going to go all the way around. You can also use your tool for this part. Okay, so now I've got like 4, maybe 5 inches. This is nice and thick, so it's pretty strong. But as you get a little bit of height, you might find that you might need to get like a long strip of plastic and start putting it on here, letting this part set up. We do want to be careful that the bottom doesn't get too dry. So right now the wood is going to be pulling some moisture out, and that is great because we want this to set up. But as you're working and you're working up top, you might find that you need to take this off and put plastic underneath it so that this will stay leather hard. Hard leather hard is fine if you're mostly done with details, but yeah, we want to keep this at about leather hard until we're done working. So I'm gonna let this set up for a minute, and I'll be back to finish building up the base. All right, this has gotten a little bit set up, and I'm here with my trusty metal rib just to get rid of some of this wild texture. And if I see I've got some like parts moving in, I can always kind of push them out from the inside. I can play with the contours like that. Okay, and again, I'm not super worried about this being ultra smooth right now, but sometimes it just helps me to get some of that texture out of the way. All right, so I'm gonna build up a little further. Okay, so now I'm gonna start coming in. I'm gonna start bringing in the shoulder. So I'm putting the coil on top and inside of the one before it. So if you look really closely, you can see I'm putting it inside. So instead of on top, putting it inside the one before it, just a little to the inside. And I'll do that again on the next one. And as you can see, this will bring it in. All right, so I'm gonna just go 2 now, because you might have started to notice, like, this is another place where you might get challenged by gravity, because now we're going in, it wants to flop in a little. So if you find that happening, you've probably figured out at this point what to do. We're gonna wait. So I'm going to smooth these coils on, and then I'm gonna wait a little longer so that this gets set up. I'll put my little strip of plastic around the top coil and keep going when the rest of it is set up. If you have the ability to leave this open to air and keep a really close eye on it, do that. If you do need to leave it, then lightly cover with plastic. But again, you have to kind of monitor. It's the nature of clay. Monitor, monitor, monitor. All right, when we get to our shoulders, we're gonna need to come in a lot more because we need to get to our neck. And so you can do this a couple of ways. You could kind of pinch out a slab, but I just like to do a couple of extra coils in here, like this. Do it on the other side as well. Again, I want to make sure that I've got that nice height that I like. Connect these edges. I'm just kind of sculpting with my coils. Okay, and then I'm going to smush them into place, just as I would if I had gone all the way around, like we did in our coil project. Okay, so this might require a little more support on the inside and the outside as we do them, because we're sculpting a bit more, but that's fine. Between the thicker coils and our smoothing them together, they actually are quite strong. And don't be afraid to go in and use a tool if you need to, if it's hard to reach. Okay. So, this one. So I'm just using my thumb to get in there, smooth them into the place, and using my tool when I need to. And Another thing I can do is if I do get a little sag, I can push out from the inside, which is really nice. Okay, so look at that. I've got a nice shape. You can always be looking around, making sure you like that contour. We can add on to this and we can take away from it, but we just want this basic shape to start with. And I'm just gonna keep going until I have my neck. Okay, now that we're doing the neck, now I'm going to be placing the coil right on top of the one in front of it so that it comes straight up. Okay, so now you might need your tool. I'm going to Right, so I'm going to use my tool to get down in here, smush all these coils together really well. Okay, before we move on to the head, we're gonna wanna do some of this rougher smoothing and still reach in. We can push out from inside if we need to. We can support from inside. Okay, last but not least, if you're going to be sculpting into this, when it's still thick and still relatively plastic, although it's going to be setting up now, which is good, you can start to kind of sculpt in, like say I was going to sculpt in some shoulder blades here. You can start to push and sculpt those in. Okay, and other types of like features. Now these busts do not need to be, this is kind of a clavicle area, these busts don't need to be realistic, but if you have some realistic qualities, this is where you can start to rough those in. Okay, for our heads, this is not the only way to do this. I am hoping that this will be a good way for our working at home circumstances, but I'm going to make 2 coiled half circles that are the same diameter, and you could measure this out. I'm just gonna eyeball it, and I'm gonna have them come up into a sphere shape, an oblong sphere, and then once these are done, I'll put them together. So I'm gonna show you how I do that. All right, we're gonna let these get just a bit set up, then we're gonna combine them. And then you again are gonna be able to push some of those realistic features in. Okay, it is 24 hours later. These have set up, so you can see they're supporting themselves, but they're pretty thick. They're that like kind of 3/4, half to 3/4 of an inch thickness. So even though they're not solid, they're hollow, we are gonna be able to do some pushing and pulling. But the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put these together to make my head. Okay, I got my trusty fork. So I'm gonna get these really well scratched and scored. Okay, I'm going to get plenty of water in here, just because it's bigger, so it's going to require a little more. Okay, and then I'm going to get these Velcroed together. So you might find now that I've got a round piece, like how do I set this down? So I'm gonna get some of my foam, a pillow, even a towel, like a couple of rolled up towels that you can always wash those later, can help. So then I'm gonna get these Velcroed together. Gonna really make sure that they're squished together, Velcroed all the way. And then I'm gonna press a coil in. To make sure we're filling in that whole area. Okay, press a big fat coil in. At this point, all of this is pretty soft. Give it a little smooth. Okay, so as you know, when we do a big construction connection like that, we need to wrap this up in plastic and leave it overnight so that this can get equalized, so that this isn't all sticky right here, okay? So that's what's gonna need to happen with that. But now I have a head that I can start to work on, all right? And because this is on the thicker side, it's supporting itself, but it is also still pretty malleable. So as I'm starting to work in, I can kind of like use my imagination, or if we're going realistic, we can use some of the handouts that Aisha shared with us, and we can kind of figure out where is our apex and where do the eyes go, and then we can start to gently start to make that socket. Okay, oh, can you see this? You can start to make that socket area. And I'm just showing you for example, because I want you to get going, get all of this built up, that you're able to do this. But of course, at the stage where you're ready to do this, you're gonna wanna lay out all of your facial features or whatever kind of features. This may not be a realistic face on your sculpture. But as you can see, yeah, we can still shape quite a bit. Right now there is trapped air, so that's also helping us keep the shape. And I can actually just work on the head and the eyes and that kind of stuff if I want to do that in my lap or on the table. A quick couple of tips that don't fit in a chronological order. So to make my head, I coiled 2 halves of a head and I put them together. You might decide to coil from the crown of the head down. You know, you would coil up but create that much, and then work on your eyes and your nose and your mouth, scoop out anything you need to, and then complete the head either by coiling right up off of that or doing another coil or pinch piece and attaching it, that's totally fine. That works great. You might do this and then realize you need to get into your head. And as we talked about during Aisha's workshop, I could simply cut the top of the head off, do whatever I need to do, thin anything out that I need to thin out behind features or behind hair, and then put the top of the head back on. And the way that we do that, I'll show you really quick. Okay, so obviously this is completely unfinished, but I just want to show you so that you have it in your head and it doesn't feel scary. So you could use a fettling knife or you could use a wire tool. So I could just cut straight through with my wire tool. And then I can get in here, and if I have, in fact, like since I scratched and scored and connected these two halves, I can actually get in here with my tool and I can clean this up. I'm also going to use my tools, my scoop or loop tools or ribbon tools will work really well for getting any thickness out. So you can see where I started to make the eye, this is coming back and there'll be a bit of thickness. I can gently scoop that out. So there you go. That's the way to do it. And then to put it back together, I just scratch and score again, just like I did to connect the two halves. All right, so that's a little bit random, but I just want you to have that process in your brain so that it doesn't feel scary, or when you realize that you need to do that, it doesn't feel like impossible, because as Aisha mentioned, we don't want your like beautifully sculpted eye to pop out. Depending on your design, you might not have to do this part of the process where you scoop things out. It just depends on your design. Your sketches will be your guide, and I can't wait to see them. So we've got our head made and we've got our body made, and so and this may look a little bit different if your design was different, but this is a good basic structure to start from. And I'm going to put this video up as part 1, let you get going, and then I'm going to come back and show you how I sort of do my decorative elements and bring this whole thing together in part 2.